Hey guys! So today you and I are going to talk about getting a new job. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederick, what should I look for when I'm getting a new job as a software developer? Well, I would say it depends of course on a few of your personality traits and things like that, and most importantly, which is what I want to talk about, is where you are in your career and what goals you have. Let me explain that a little bit. So, what I will argue to you is that depending on at which stage of your career you are in, the company that you pick may in some cases be more important than if you're in a different stage. So an example I like to use is that quite a lot of software developers, I hope, will agree with me when I say that there are quite a lot of systems out there in the world that are not all that greatly designed. There's things like tech debt, weird specifications, and troublesome stakeholders and product managers and things like that. There's all of these different complications that you might find within the wild when you work as a software developer. And what I argue to you is that depending on whether or not you're a senior or a junior, that will factor in quite a lot at how well you do in any given company and any given code base. In one code base where you might have, let's say, a younger code base with not a lot of legacy and things like that, it might be for a senior developer that might be a pleasant surprise, because as a senior you've probably seen your fair share of systems, but you're at least at a level where you can handle more complicated systems, but that can be what makes or breaks a junior level software developer. I've worked with quite a lot of software developers who, on a smaller system, can handle things fairly well because there's not that much code and complexity, but in a different system or in a more complicated product it's much more tricky. I myself have been there where one of the first things that I needed to build as a software developer was a salary management system for small businesses. Now that doesn't sound all that complicated, and this was a startup, so the code base itself wasn't all that super big. It was complicated for me because I was fresh out of school and so forth. But one of the things that was most complicated was to actually write the implementation logic for all the tax calculations. Now that is a tricky topic for someone who is like myself, just a layman who's never ever had to learn anything about taxation laws or how to do certain calculations and things like that. It's not even just about math, it's about domain knowledge. And that domain knowledge I did not have, and it was not provided to me at that specific place of work. But then I went to another company where the situation that I find myself in was that, okay, I had a much bigger code base. There was a lot of legacy and a lot of issues. But the environment I was in had fairly senior software developers with a lot of patience with my personality and my juniority, which allowed me, even though there was more code and so forth, to grow and to hone my skills without much in terms of stress over the fact that I couldn't deliver, because both the people around me were more forgiving, and although the code was bigger, the domain, the problem we were solving, so to speak, was much simpler. There was no need for me to know fairly complicated topics in, say, taxation or some other area. You will find the same thing for people who work in very niched industries, like, say, medical engineering or things like that, where you're dealing with domains that in of themselves are like, scientific fields and chemistry and things like that, where you're building programs and systems for these sorts of people who work with those areas. I mean, that is a whole field in of itself, and as a programmer it can be very tricky for you to understand all that. And so what I argue is that when you are looking for a new job, these are the things that you should be considering. I'm not saying that it's as easy and cut and dry to say that just if you're a junior, smaller code base is better. As I said in my little story, the code base was not that big, but the problem we were solving was highly complicated, and there's another nuance to this that is important to know. And that is that when you join the company, their technical state, like what we call tech debt, but I don't want to exclude it I don't want to narrow it down to just tech debt, because it's not just about tech debt. It is about the entire ecosystem around the software that you are developing that is going to determine how easy it is for you to adopt it. And this is I would say it's true for all the way up to senior level software developers. I see quite a lot of seniors these days who have the title senior, but in practice, even though that is supposed to be the quote-unquote highest level that you can achieve, or the highest level of experience in terms of titles at the very least, they completely choke on the project, because the project has a range of tools and other services and practices and things like that that they need to know, but they earn the title senior on other companies or in code bases or in situations where the requirements of them as a single software developer is lower. And that's the main thing I argue to our industry. I argue that the strategy that is most, well, it's the most surefire way I know to ensure that your system lives a long and happy, fruitful life until it's sunset mode, basically. It is that you have to understand that the goal should be to simplify the system as much as possible, because if you can simplify the system without compromising on quality and delivery and features and stuff like that, you will increase the likelihood that you don't get bugs. You will increase the amount, the range of people you can hire is also higher, because as you probably know, guys, there's quite a lot of junior software developers who get into a gig where they get hired to do the thing I'm saying, to take on a project there where the technical skills necessary to survive in that environment is at a senior level, or even higher, because as I said, I see that with seniors as well, where we literally have to get rid of them in some companies because they simply cannot survive in that ecosystem. So what you should be looking for is first and foremost a place of work which will fit into what you're trying to achieve. Because if you go into, say, let's say that you are a super senior software and you really know your stuff, then you can basically work wherever when you're looking for a new job. Like, the only thing you really have to consider is, oh, okay, is the pay good, and does this place of work offer me something that I'm looking for? But for a junior, you have to be aware of that. If you get put into the wrong context, it will be hard for you to swim or to survive. And the same thing for people who are a little bit sketchy on their skills, even though they're seniors and so forth, because not every company is the same. Every code base is different, even if it's roughly the same sort of tools. And I see it all the time, guys. I see teams and products kind of go into really bad situations due to the fact that there's a mismatch with how complex or how sophisticated is the coding and all the surrounding things around this product that they are building, and at what skill level are the software developers. And those things are always correlated. The top-notch software developers, they can basically work on any project. It doesn't matter where they go for work. But for someone who is maybe at a mid-level or a junior and so forth, it becomes more important that you find a good match between your current stage of your career and your current skill level and the sort of things you'll be doing within the company. So what I want you to take away from this is that the thing that you should be looking for when you're getting a new job is basically always dependent on, one, of course, of what your goals are and so forth, but I also want to make the argument for where are you in your career. If you're a super junior software developer, I usually argue that the best thing for you is to go to a product company or a company that is stable, as I call it. Doesn't have to be a big corporation. It can be a startup. It just has to be stable enough, and ideally a systems like archetype that is basically a CRUD application type of thing, where most of the work is fairly, as I call it, basic stuff. You're creating, reading, deleting, updating things in a database somewhere, and there's some web interface or something like that. It's nothing it doesn't have to be fancy. It can be a quote-unquote boring application. The reason why I argue for that is because you have yet to really master the craft, which means that it's pretty good for you to find a place of work where you get to really get solid in your basics. For a mid-level, that might still be true depending on the range of things you have been doing, because the more and more sophisticated the system, the harder it will be for you to adopt and learn from it. And in some cases, you might actually lose your job due to the fact that you can't perform. And the trickiest part about this is that it's really tough to know that in an interview. So in many cases, you just have to do the best and get a good gut feeling for the situation and sort of set the expectations correctly and be transparent about where you are in your career and what sort of things you need from a place of work when you're doing the interviews, and then try it out. Because once you are in, you will start to see all the things for what they really are, because it's basically impossible, I will argue, to figure all of this stuff out once you're in like the hunting grounds for what you're looking for next and so forth. And even in the interview, you're not going to get a perfectly clear picture of how everything works. It's only by sort of learning by doing that you're going to figure out how things work and so forth. And that's the thing I suggest that you look for the most. Try to find that match between where you are right now and the place of work that you find yourself in. Because if there's a mismatch there, it might hurt your your future career, or it might hurt you personally, emotionally, and things like that. And if you are in such a situation, remember guys, just because one system is really, really shitty or like very complicated to work with and it's sort of not something that you can really deal with, doesn't mean that the next company will have an identical system. New company almost always means new system. You can't know exactly how well you're going to do in the next company, but don't give up just because you find yourself in a situation where you're working in a way that doesn't really work out for you. Have a great day.